The huge metal doors of the Zephyrian Council room opened with a deep sound that echoed through the empty halls. Admiral Vexthara walked slowly inside, her long purple robes flowing behind her like water. She carried a small silver device in her 6-fingered hand. The device held memories that still gave her nightmares after 50 years. The council members sat in their tall chairs around a circular table made of black stone. Each chair was different, made for the different body types of the Zephyrian species. Some had long necks, others had 4 arms, and a few had wings folded behind their backs. But they all shared the same look in their large, dark eyes. Fear. "Show us," said Council Leader Morthek, his voice deep and tired. He was old, even by Zephyrian standards. His skin was gray like old metal, and scars covered his arms from the last war. "Show us what we faced 50 years ago." Vexthara placed the device on the table. It hummed softly and then created a large picture made of light in the air above them. The image showed space, dark and endless, filled with stars. But this was not peaceful space. This was a battlefield. Human ships moved through the darkness, like angry insects. They were small compared to the massive Zephyrian war vessels, but they moved fast and struck hard. The human ships had strange designs. Some looked like they were built from pieces of other ships. Others had weapons attached in places that made no sense to Zephyrian engineers. "The humans called this the Battle of Titan's Edge," Vexthara said, her voice quiet but clear. "We brought 200 ships. They had 50. We should have won easily." The light picture changed. Now it showed a human ship, badly damaged and leaking air from multiple holes. Half of its weapons were destroyed, and it was spinning slowly. Through space, any normal species would have surrendered. The Zephyrians watching expected to see surrender signals. Instead, the damaged human ship suddenly burst forward, heading straight for a Zephyrian battleship that was 10 times its size. The human ship crashed into the alien vessel, and both exploded in a bright flash of light. "They did not surrender," Vexthara continued. "They never surrendered. When their weapons failed, they used their ships as weapons. When their ships were destroyed, they used escape pods as weapons. When they had nothing left, they used themselves." Council member Yeldona, who had been young during the war, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "But we won that battle. We destroyed their fleet." "Did we?" Vexthara asked. She changed the picture again. Now it showed the aftermath of the battle. The space around them was filled with wreckage from both sides, but the numbers were wrong. The Zephyrians have lost more ships than the humans, even though they had started with 4 times as many. "We lost 80 ships that day," Vexthara said. "They lost all 50 of theirs, but they made us pay for every single one. And while we were repairing our damage, they were building more ships." The picture changed again. This time it showed human shipyards, working day and night. The humans had learned from the battle. Their new ships were different, better. They had studied Zephyrian tactics and found ways to counter them. "This is how they fought," Vexthara said. "Not like us. Not like any species we had ever encountered. They learned from every defeat. They adapted to every tactic. They turned their losses into lessons, and their lessons into weapons." The room was silent, except for the soft humming of the device. The council members stared at the pictures, remembering their own experiences from the war. Many of them had been soldiers then. They had seen things that still haunted their dreams. "Tell them about the ground battles," said General Kethmara from the back of the room. He was not a council member, but he had been invited because of his experience. His body was covered in scars from human weapons, and he walked with a limp from Va. An old injury. Vexthara nodded and changed the picture once more. Now it showed a human city under attack. Zephyrian forces were advancing through the streets, their advanced weapons cutting through buildings like paper. The humans were retreating, their defenders falling back, block by block. We thought we were winning, Vexthara said. We had superior technology, superior numbers, superior tactics. The humans were just primitives with simple weapons. We expected them to surrender when they saw our power. But the picture showed something different. As the Zephyrian forces advanced, the human city began to change. Buildings collapsed in carefully planned ways, blocking streets and creating choke points. Underground tunnels connected buildings, allowing human fighters to attack from unexpected directions. The retreating humans left behind traps and bombs that exploded when the aliens tried to advance. They turned their own city into a weapon, Vexthara said. Every building became a fortress. Every street became a trap. Every civilian became a soldier. They did not just fight us. They became the battlefield itself. The picture showed human civilians, people who should have been running for safety, instead helping to dig tunnels and plant explosives. Old humans, young humans, even children helped in the defense. They carried messages, brought supplies, and tended to the wounded. The entire population had become part of the war effort. It took us 6 months to capture that one city, General. Kethmara said, his voice bitter with memory. 6 months. And when we finally broke through their defenses, we found that they had evacuated all the civilians through those tunnels. We had conquered empty buildings. But that was not the worst part, Vexthara added. The picture changed again, showing the aftermath of the battle. The city was in ruins, but the humans had not given up. They continued to fight from the rubble, using the destroyed buildings as cover. They attacked supply lines, ambushed patrols, and made it impossible for the Zephyrians to hold the territory they had won. We could defeat their armies, Vexthara said. We could destroy their cities, but we could not defeat their spirit. Every victory cost us more than it cost them. Every planet we conquered became a source of constant attacks. They made it impossible for us to win. The council members looked at each other with growing unease. They remembered how the war had ended, not with a great battle or a decisive victory, but with exhaustion. Both sides had simply been too tired to continue fighting. The peace treaty had been signed more out of necessity than choice. "Why are you showing us this now?" asked Council Leader Morthic. "The war ended 50 years ago. We have had peace since then." Vexthara turned off the device, and the pictures disappeared. The room seemed darker without the light from the images. She looked around at the council members, seeing the same fear in their eyes that she felt in her own heart. "Because," she said slowly, "we may have to fight them again. And this time, they have had 50 years to prepare." The silence that followed was complete. Every council member understood what that meant. The humans they had barely defeated 50 years ago were now stronger, smarter, and more experienced. They had learned from that war just as much as the Zephyrians had. But where the Zephyrians had learned to fear humans, the humans had learned to fight them better. Outside the council chamber, in the corridors of the great building, Zephyrian guards walked their patrols. They did not know about the meeting happening inside. They did not know that their leaders were discussing the possibility of another war with the humans. But if they had known, they would have understood their leaders' fear, because every Zephyrian who had fought in the last war carried the same scars, the same memories, and the same terrible knowledge. They had battled humanity once, and they knew that a second time meant annihilation. The trade station orbited between two star systems, a massive structure built from metal and glass that sparkled in the light of distant suns. Inside, humans and Zephyrians worked side by side, negotiating deals that would benefit both species. At least, that was what everyone was supposed to believe. Ambassador Helen Carter walked through the station's main corridor, her footsteps echoing on the polished floor. She wore the formal blue uniform of the human diplomatic corps, with golden buttons that caught the artificial light. Behind her walked two assistants, both carrying electronic tablets filled with trade agreements and shipping schedules. "The Zephyrians seem eager to expand our grain exports," said her assistant, a young woman named Katie Brooks. "They're offering excellent prices for wheat and corn from the colony worlds." Helen nodded, but something felt wrong. In her 20 years as a diplomat, she had learned to read people, and the Zephyrians were acting strange. They were too eager, too willing to agree to human terms. It was as if they were trying to keep the humans happy about something at the same time. On the other side of the station, Colonel Ryan Phillips was having his own concerns. He stood in the security office, watching camera feeds from around the station. The Zephyrian guards were acting differently than they had during previous meetings. They were more alert, more nervous. "Sir," said Sergeant Linda Hayes, pointing to one of the screens. "The Zephyrian guards have been changing shifts more often. They're also carrying heavier weapons than the peace treaty allows." Ryan frowned. The peace treaty from 50 years ago had strict rules about weapons on neutral stations. Both sides were supposed to bring only light defensive weapons. But the Zephyrians were clearly breaking those rules. "Keep watching them," Ryan ordered, "and make sure our people know to be ready for anything." 3 levels down in the Zephyrian section of the station, a different kind of meeting was taking place. General Kethmara stood in a small windowless room, surrounded by his intelligence officers. Holographic displays showed human ship movements, colony populations, and military strength estimates. "The humans now have settlements on 47 worlds," reported Commander Veltara, her voice tight with worry. "Their population has grown to over 12 billion. Every colony world has defensive installations. What about their military?" Kethmara asked. "Stronger than before," another officer answered. "They have learned from our last war. Their ships are faster, their weapons more efficient. But the real problem is their production capacity. They can build ships faster than we can destroy them." Kethmara studied the displays with growing alarm. The humans had not been idle during the 50 years of peace. They had grown stronger, more numerous, and more spread out across the galaxy. If war came again, it would be much harder to defeat them. Back in the diplomatic section, Helen was meeting with her Zephyrian counterpart, Trade Minister Zarthik. The alien was tall and thin, with 4 arms and skin that changed color based on his emotions. Right now, his skin was a nervous shade of green. "The mining rights on Kepler 442b are very important to us," Zarthik said, his voice unusually tense. "We need access to the rare minerals there." Helen found this request odd. The Zephyrians had their own mining worlds, many of them richer than the human colonies. Why were they so interested in this particular planet? "We can discuss mining rights," Helen said carefully, "but we would need to know what you plan to do with the minerals." Zarthik's skin flickered to a darker green. "Standard industrial uses. Shipbuilding, electronics, that sort of thing." But Helen had done her homework. The minerals on Kepler 442b were not used for normal ship building. They were used for military armor and weapon systems. The Zephyrians were asking for materials that could only be used for war. Meanwhile, Dr. Patricia Wells was working in the Joint Research Laboratory, trying to understand Zephyrian biology. She was a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes, but she had a sharp mind for science. The Zephyrians had asked her to help them understand human medical needs for long space flights. "Dr. Wells," said her Zephyrian research partner, Dr. Yex Moda, "we need to understand human pain tolerance. How much physical stress can your species handle before becoming unable to function?" Patricia found the question strange. Medical research, usually focused on preventing pain, not measuring how much pain someone could take. Why do you need to know that? For emergency medical procedures, Yexmoda answered quickly. If humans are injured in space accidents, we need to know how to treat them. But Patricia was not convinced. The questions were too specific, too focused on human limits and weaknesses. It felt more like someone was trying to find ways to hurt humans, not help them. On the observation deck of the station, Captain Jake Morrison stood looking out at the stars. He was supposed to be the military liaison for the human delegation, but he felt more like a spy. The Zephyrians were asking too many questions about human military capabilities, human colony defenses, and human population centers. Captain, said Lieutenant Amy Foster, approaching him with a worried expression, I've been monitoring Zephyrian communications. There's a lot of military traffic between their ships and their homeworld. Jake turned to look at her. What kind of military traffic? Troop movement reports, weapon status updates, strategic planning documents. It's all encrypted, but the volume is much higher than normal for a trade mission. Jake felt a cold chill run down his spine. The Zephyrians were not here to trade. They were here to gather intelligence for something much more dangerous. In another part of the station, Zephyrian intelligence officer, Sub-Commander Veltara, was compiling her own reports. She had been watching the humans carefully, noting their reactions, their questions, their concerns. The humans were suspicious, which meant they were not as naive as the Zephyrians had hoped. The humans know something is wrong, she reported to her superior through an encrypted communication channel. They are asking too many questions and watching us too closely. Continue your observations, came the reply. We need to know exactly what they are capable of. Veltara closed the communication and looked around the station. The humans seemed so normal, so peaceful. They smiled, they laughed, they worked together with the Zephyrians as if they were friends. But she had read the reports from the last war. She knew what these peaceful-looking humans could become when threatened. As the days passed, the tension on the station grew stronger. Both sides were pretending to negotiate trade agreements while actually gathering intelligence about each other. The humans were trying to figure out what the Zephyrians were really planning. The Zephyrians were trying to learn how to defeat the humans if war came again. Helen Carter found herself in an impossible position. She was supposed to be building friendship between the two species, but she could see that the Zephyrians were preparing for war. Every conversation, every meeting, every seemingly innocent question was actually part of a larger plan. We need to report this to Earth, she told Colonel Phillips during a private meeting. The Zephyrians are not here to trade. They're here to spy on us. I agree, Phillips replied, but we need more proof. If we accuse them without evidence, it could start the war they're planning. Dr. Wells made her own disturbing discovery. While reviewing the research data, she found that the Zephyrians had been asking questions about human reproduction rates, human child development, and human family structures. These were not medical questions. These were questions someone would ask if they were planning to attack human civilians. They're not trying to understand our medicine, she told her assistant, Dr. Chris Allen. They're trying to understand how to hurt us where it matters most. The fake peace talks continued, but everyone on the station could feel the growing tension. The Zephyrians were becoming more nervous, more aggressive in their questions. The humans were becoming more suspicious, more careful in their answers. Captain, Morrison realized that the situation was getting dangerous. Both sides were gathering information for a war that neither side officially wanted, but both sides were preparing for. The question was not whether the war would come, but when. We need to get our people ready, he told his security team. If shooting starts, we need to be able to protect the diplomatic staff and get them off this station. The irony was not lost on anyone involved. They were all gathered on a station designed to promote peace and cooperation, but they were actually preparing for war. The trade agreements being negotiated would never be signed. The friendship being discussed would never be real. As the fake negotiations continued, one thing became clear to everyone on the station. The peace that had lasted for 50 years was ending. The question was not whether there would be another war between humans and Zephyrians. The question was whether humanity would survive it. The alert came at 0300 hours, ship time. Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner was pulled from his sleep by the sharp sound of the emergency signal. He rolled out of his bunk aboard the human vessel Endeavor and quickly pulled on his uniform. Something was happening in the Zephyrian sector. "All hands to observation stations," came the voice over the ship's communication system. "This is not a drill." Alex made his way to the bridge, where he found Captain Morrison already at his post, staring at the main screen. In the darkness of space, the Zephyrian fleet was conducting what they called a routine training exercise. But Alex had been watching Zephyrian military operations for 5 years, and this was not routine. "Look at their formation," Morrison said, pointing to the screen. "Those ships are arranged for siege warfare, not training." Alex studied the display. The Zephyrian ships were positioned in a pattern he had seen before in military history books. It was the same formation used to surround and destroy planetary defenses. The formation was designed to prevent any ships from escaping and to concentrate maximum firepower on a single target. They're practicing how to destroy human colonies. Alex realized. On Earth, intelligence analyst Karen Rodriguez was having the same realization. She sat in her small office in the basement of the Human Defense Ministry, surrounded by computer screens showing intercepted alien communications. For weeks, she had been collecting fragments of Zephyrian messages, trying to piece together their meaning. "Director Cole," she called to her supervisor, "you need to see this." Director Cole was a tired-looking man in his 50s who had been analyzing alien intelligence for most of his career. He walked over to Corinne's desk and looked at the information she had compiled. The Zephyrians have been moving military equipment to their border systems, Corinne explained. Not normal equipment, siege weapons, planet killers. Cole studied the data with growing alarm. The evidence was clear. The Zephyrians were not preparing for defense. They were preparing for invasion. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Based on their construction schedule, maybe 6 months," Corinne answered. "Maybe less." Meanwhile, in the orbital city of New Geneva, Admiral Lisa Grant was reviewing reports from across human space. The news was not good. Zephyrian trade missions had been visiting human colonies, asking detailed questions about defensive capabilities, population centers, and evacuation procedures. "It's a pattern," she told her staff during an emergency meeting. "They're gathering intelligence on every human world. They want to know exactly where to hit us and how to hit us hard." Her aide, Commander Betty Walsh, brought up a holographic map of human space. Red dots marked the locations of Zephyrian activity. The pattern was clear and terrifying. The aliens were mapping every human settlement, every military base, every important facility. "They're not planning to fight our military," Grant realized. "They're planning to destroy our civilization." Back on the trade station, the truth was becoming harder to hide. Dr. Patricia Wells had discovered that her Zephyrian research partner was not asking medical questions at all. The questions were about human psychology, human breaking points, and human behavioral patterns under extreme stress. "You're not studying medicine," she confronted Dr. Yex Moda during their daily meeting. "You're studying how to break us." The alien's skin changed to a dark red color, which Patricia had learned meant anger or guilt. "I do not understand your accusation." "You asked me how humans react when their children are threatened," Patricia said. "You asked me how humans behave when their homes are destroyed. You asked me what it takes to make humans surrender. These are not medical questions." Dr. Yexmoda remained silent, but her skin continued to darken. Patricia realized she was right. The Zephyrians were not trying to understand human medicine. They were trying to understand how to destroy human morale. The revelation came during what should have been a routine diplomatic dinner. Ambassador Helen Carter was sharing a meal with Trade Minister Zarthik when the alien accidentally revealed the truth. "When the war comes," Zarthik said, then stopped suddenly, realizing his mistake. Helen put down her fork and stared at him. "When the war comes, not if the war comes?" Zarthik's skin flickered through several colors before settling on a pale white, which Helen had learned meant fear. "I misspoke. I meant if there were ever problems between our species." But Helen was not fooled. "No, you said when. You know something is going to happen." The alien stood up quickly, his meal forgotten. "I must return to my quarters. I am not feeling well." As he left, Helen realized that the Zephyrians were not just preparing for war. They had already decided that war was inevitable. The only question was when they would strike. Colonel Ryan Phillips received confirmation of their suspicions from an unexpected source. One of the Zephyrian guards, a young soldier named Kextar, approached him in a corridor away from the security. "Cameras, I need to speak with you," the alien said quietly. "It is important." Ryan looked around to make sure they were alone. "What is it?" "My people are planning to attack yours," Kextar said. "I have friends among humans. I do not want to see them killed." "When?" Ryan asked. "Soon, very soon. Our leaders believe that humans have become too strong. They think the only way to survive is to destroy you completely." Ryan felt his heart racing. "How do you know this?" "I have seen the battle plans. I have heard the discussions. This is not about trade or territory. This is about extinction. Your extinction." The young alien looked around nervously. "I must go. If they discover I have told you this, they will kill me. But you must warn your people. You must prepare." As Kextar disappeared into the crowd, Ryan realized that the situation was even worse than they had thought. The Zephyrians were not just planning a war. They were planning genocide. Captain Morrison called an emergency meeting of all human personnel on the station. In a sealed conference room, he shared what they had learned. "The Zephyrians are not here to trade," he announced. "They are here to gather intelligence for a war of extermination." The room erupted in shocked voices. Some of the diplomats could not believe what they were hearing. They had been working with the Zephyrians for months, building what they thought was friendship. "Are you certain?" asked Helen Carter. "Multiple sources confirm it," Morrison replied. "They have been asking questions about our weaknesses, our population centers, our defensive capabilities. They have been moving military equipment to attack positions. And they have been studying us to find the best ways to destroy our will to fight." Dr. Wells spoke up. "They wanted to know how to hurt us psychologically. They were particularly interested in human families and human children." The implications were clear to everyone in the room. The Zephyrians were not planning a military campaign. They were planning to attack human civilians, human families, human children. They wanted to destroy humanity completely. "We need to get this information to Earth immediately," Helen said. "Our people need to know what's coming." But Morrison shook his head. "It's too late for that. Look outside." The humans in the room moved to the windows and looked out at the space around the station. The Zephyrian fleet had moved closer during their meeting. The alien ships were now surrounding the station, their weapons pointed inward. "They know that we know," Morrison said grimly. "They're not going to let us leave." Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner studied the Zephyrian formation with professional interest. "They're not just preventing us from leaving. They're using us as a test." "A test for what?" someone asked. "To see how humans react when they're trapped," Alex explained. They want to study our behavior under pressure. They want to see if we panic, if we fight, or if we try to negotiate. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The humans on the station were not just prisoners. They were test subjects in a Zephyrian experiment to learn how to defeat humanity. Outside, the alien ships continued their slow approach. Their weapons were charged and ready. The humans were trapped, surrounded, and outnumbered. By any rational calculation, they should have been preparing to surrender. But as the Zephyrians were about to learn, humans did not react to impossible situations the way other species did. Instead of panic or despair, the humans began to plan. "How many of us are there?" Morrison asked. 47, Ryan answered. "Plus the ship's crew, that makes 63 total." "Against how many Zephyrians?" "At least 2,000 on the station, plus the crews of those ships. Maybe 10,000 total." The odds were hopeless. Any sane species would have surrendered. But the humans in that room were not thinking about surrender. They were thinking about how to fight back. "We need to assume that war has already begun," Morrison said. "Our job is to survive long enough to warn Earth about what's coming." As the meeting continued, none of the humans noticed the small listening device that had been planted in the room. On the other side of the station, Zephyrian intelligence officers were recording every word, studying every reaction, learning everything they could about human behavior under extreme stress. But they were also learning something they had not expected. They were learning that humans, when faced with impossible odds, did not break. They adapted. And that realization should have terrified them. The warning reached Earth through an old communication method that the Zephyrians had forgotten about. Before the trade station went dark, Dr. Patricia Wells had managed to send a single message through the Deep Space Research Network. The message was simple: "They come for all of us." Admiral Lisa Grant received the message while she was reviewing fleet deployment schedules in her office. The words were few, but their meaning was clear. The Zephyrians were not planning a limited conflict. They were planning total war, within hours. Emergency signals were being sent to every human colony, every military base, every settlement scattered across 47 worlds. A message was the same everywhere: prepare for extinction. On the agricultural world of New Kansas, Farmer Jim Roberts was working in his wheat fields when the emergency broadcast reached him. He stopped his harvester and listened to the message with growing horror. The Zephyrians were coming, and they were not planning to take prisoners. "Martha," he called to his wife, "gather the children. We need to go to the shelter." But Martha Roberts was not thinking about hiding. She was thinking about the weapons cache that the local militia had prepared years ago, just in case. "The shelter won't be enough, Jim. If they're coming to kill us all, we need to fight back." Similar conversations were happening across human space. On the mining colony of Titan's Rest, mine supervisor Carol Davis was converting the mining equipment into weapons. The same tools that dug through rock could be used to dig through Zephyrian armor. "We can't run," she told her workers. "There's nowhere to go that they won't find us. So we make them pay for every life they take." The miners, men and women who had spent their lives working in dangerous conditions, nodded in agreement. They had always known that life in space was dangerous. Now they were learning that sometimes the greatest danger came from other living beings. On the research station orbiting Kepler 442b, Dr. Nancy Price was making a discovery that could change everything. She had been working on theoretical physics. When the war warning arrived, but instead of evacuating, she decided to stay and continue her research. "Commander Baker," she said to the station's military liaison, "I think I've found something important." Commander Steve Baker was busy preparing the station's defenses, but he stopped to listen. Dr. Price was one of the smartest people he had ever met, and if she said something was important, it usually was. "What have you found?" he asked. The Zephyrians have been asking us about our faster-than-light travel systems, she explained. They want to know how our ships move between star systems so quickly. So they're not asking because they want to improve their own ships. They're asking because they want to stop our ships from moving at all. Baker felt a chill run down his spine. They want to trap us in our own star systems. Exactly. But I think I know how to prevent that, and maybe how to turn it against them. Dr. Price showed him her research on space-time manipulation. It was complex science that Baker did not fully understand, but the implications were clear. If the Zephyrians could trap human ships, then humans could potentially trap Zephyrian ships. How long do you need to make this work? Baker asked. Give me 2 weeks and a team of engineers, she replied, and we might be able to give humanity a fighting chance. Meanwhile, on Earth, the largest military mobilization in human history was taking place. Admiral Grant had converted every civilian shipyard into a military production facility. Cargo ships were being fitted with weapons. Passenger vessels were being converted into troop transports. Even private yachts were being armed and pressed into service. We need every ship we can get, she told her staff. If the Zephyrians are planning to destroy us completely, we need to be ready to fight with everything we have. The problem was not just about ships and weapons. It was about strategy. The Zephyrians had superior technology and more experience with large-scale warfare. Humanity's only advantage was the same one they had possessed 50 years ago: the ability to adapt and survive. We can't fight them the way they expect us to fight, Grant explained to her commanders. If we try to match them ship for ship, we'll lose. We need to fight like humans. What does that mean? Asked General Robert Cole. It means we use their expectations against them, Grant replied. They think they know how we fight because they fought us before, but we've learned from that war too. The new human war doctrine was based on a simple principle: never fight fair. If the Zephyrians had better ships, humans would fight in asteroid fields where big ships could not maneuver. If the Zephyrians had better weapons, humans would fight at close range where weapons were less important than courage. On the frontier world of Haven's Rest, the local population was preparing for siege. The planet had only 50,000 inhabitants, but they had been preparing for this possibility for decades. Every building had been constructed with defense in mind. Every citizen had been trained in basic combat skills. We're not soldiers, said Mayor Frank Miller to his people, but we're not going to die quietly either. The preparations were not just military. The humans were also preparing psychologically for what was coming. They knew that the Zephyrians were planning to attack civilian targets, to destroy human families, to break human morale. They want us to be afraid, said Dr. Susan Taylor, a psychologist who had been working with the colonial militia. They want us to surrender because we're scared for our children. But fear can be a weapon too, if we use it right. The human colonies began a program of psychological preparation. Children were taught that the aliens were not invincible. Families were taught to support each other during the coming crisis. Communities were taught to work together to survive. But the most important, preparation was happening in the hearts and minds of individual humans. They were preparing to do whatever it took to survive, no matter how terrible the cost. Captain Morrison, still trapped on the trade station, was watching the Zephyrian preparations with professional interest. The aliens were getting ready to use the station as a base for their attack on human space. They were bringing in supplies, weapons, and additional troops. They're making a mistake, he told his staff. They're assuming that we'll just sit here and wait for them to kill us. What can we do? Asked Lieutenant Amy Foster. We're outnumbered 100 to 1. We can make them pay, Morrison replied. We can show them what happens when they underestimate. Humans. The humans on the station began their own preparations. They had limited resources, But they had something the Zephyrians did not expect, a willingness to sacrifice. Everything for a chance to strike back. Dr. Wells had been working on a biological weapon, using her knowledge of Zephyrian physiology to create something that would affect only the alien species. It was not a weapon of mass destruction, but it might give the humans a chance to escape. Colonel Phillips was preparing his security team for guerrilla warfare inside the station. They could not win a direct confrontation, but they could make. The Zephyrians pay for every corridor, every room, every inch of space. We're not trying to win, he told his people. We're trying to buy time for Earth to prepare. The preparations were not just about fighting. They were about sending a message. The humans wanted the Zephyrians to understand that this war would be different from the last one. This time, humanity was ready. Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner had been studying the Zephyrian fleet formations through the station sensors. He noticed something that worried him. The alien ships were not just positioned for attack. They were positioned to prevent any escape. They're planning to use this station as an example, he realized. They want to show other humans what happens when they resist. But the humans on the station had a different plan. They were going to show the Zephyrians what happened when they threatened human lives. Back on Earth, the civilian population was responding to the crisis in ways that surprised even their own leaders. Instead of panic, there was determination. Instead of fear, there was anger. The Zephyrians had made a critical error in their planning. They had assumed that humans would react like other species when faced with extinction. In the city of New York, factory worker Pete Johnson was volunteering at a weapons manufacturing plant. He had never built military equipment before, but he was learning fast. My kids are on one of those colony worlds, he told his supervisor. I'll work 24 hours a day if it helps keep them safe. Similar scenes were playing out across Earth and the colonies. Teachers were learning to maintain communication equipment. Doctors were studying alien biology to find weaknesses. Even children were helping by carrying messages and supplies. The Zephyrians had planned for a war against human soldiers. They had not planned for a war against the entire human species. Dr. Nancy Price had made another breakthrough in her research. Working with a team of physicists from across human space, she had developed a way to disrupt Zephyrian faster-than-light travel. The technology was experimental and dangerous, but it might give humanity the advantage they needed. We can create zones of space where their ships cannot travel at light speed, she explained to Commander Baker. It won't stop them, but it will slow them down and force them to fight on our terms. The technology required massive amounts of energy and could only be used for short periods of time, but it might be enough to level the playing field. The Zephyrian High Council met in emergency session as reports flooded in from across their empire. What should have been a simple intelligence-gathering operation had turned into something much more complicated. The humans were not reacting. As expected, Council leader Morthic studied the reports with growing unease. The humans are not running, he said. They are not surrendering. They are preparing to fight. Of course they are, replied General Kethmora, his scarred face grim with memory. This is what they did 50 years ago. This is what they always do. But other council members were not convinced. War Minister Dex Thara, who had been too young to fight in the last war, believed that a quick strike would end the conflict before it could spread. We have superior numbers and superior technology, he argued. A single decisive attack will show them that resistance is hopeless. Admiral Vex Thara shook her head. You do not understand what you are suggesting. The humans do not calculate odds the way we do. The more hopeless their situation becomes, the more dangerous they become. The debate had been raging for hours. Intelligence reports showed that humans across their space were mobilizing for total war. Every colony, every settlement, every ship was being prepared for battle. It was not the response of a species planning to surrender. Look at this, Vexthara. Said, activating a holographic display. The humans on the trade station. We have them completely surrounded. They cannot escape. They cannot win, but they are still preparing to fight. The display showed the interior of the trade station, where human diplomats and scientists had turned their peaceful facility into an armed fortress. They had barricaded corridors, improvised weapons, and prepared defensive positions. They know. They will die, Vexthara continued. But they are planning to take as many of us with them as possible. This is not rational behavior. It is human behavior, Kethmara said quietly. And that is what makes them so dangerous. The council chamber fell silent as they watched the humans on the station. These were not soldiers. They were diplomats, scientists, traders. But they were preparing to fight like warriors. We could end this now, suggested Intelligence Director Yelthara. One ship could destroy that station in seconds. The humans would be eliminated, and we could proceed with our plans. But Kethmara stood up, his old wounds aching as they always did when he was stressed. And then what? Do you think the other? Humans will be frightened into surrender? Or do you think they will be enraged into fighting harder? The question hung in the air like a poison cloud. Everyone in the chamber knew the answer, but few wanted to admit it. Meanwhile, on the trade station, the humans were making their final preparations. Captain Morrison had received word that their last message had been successfully transmitted to Earth. Now they just needed to buy as much time as possible for their people to prepare. The Zephyrians are moving closer, reported Lieutenant Amy Foster from the sensor station. They'll be in position to board us within the hour. Dr. Patricia Wells was making final adjustments to her biological weapon. It was a modified virus that would cause temporary paralysis in Zephyrians while leaving humans unaffected. It would not kill the aliens, but it would give the humans a few precious hours. Remember, she told the others, this will only work once. After they know about it, they'll develop countermeasures. Colonel Phillips positioned his security team at key points throughout the station. They had improvised weapons and limited ammunition, but they had something more important. Knowledge that they were fighting for the survival of their species. We hold as long as we can, he told his people. Every minute we delay them is another minute for Earth to prepare. As the Zephyrian ships moved into boarding position, something unexpected happened. The alien fleet received new orders from their homeworld. The boarding operation was postponed while the High Council continued their debate. In the council chamber, the arguments were becoming more heated. War Minister Dexthara was insisting that immediate action was necessary. Every day we delay gives the humans more time to prepare, he argued. We should strike now while we still have the advantage of surprise. But Admiral Vexthara had been reviewing intelligence reports from human space. What she saw there chilled her to the bone. The advantage of surprise is already lost, she said. Look at these reports. Human civilian factories are producing military equipment. Human cargo ships are being converted into warships. Human colonies are being turned into fortresses. She activated another display, this one showing the human preparations across their space. The scale was staggering. Billions of humans were involved in the war effort. Entire worlds were being militarized. This is not a military mobilization. Vexthara continued. This is an entire species preparing for extinction. And when a species fights for its very survival, it becomes capable of things that should be impossible. Council member Torvek, one of the moderates, asked the question that everyone was thinking. What if we tried to negotiate? What if we offered them limited autonomy in exchange for submission? The chamber erupted in angry voices. Some council members called the suggestion cowardice. Others called it wisdom. But General Kethmara's voice cut through the noise. There will be no negotiation, he said firmly. Not because we do not want it, or because they will not accept it. I have fought humans. I have seen what they do when their survival is threatened. They do not compromise. They do not submit. They fight until they win or until they die. To prove his point, Kethmara activated a classified recording from the last war. It showed a human colony under siege by Zephyrian forces. The colonists were outnumbered and outgunned with no hope of rescue. Watch, Kethmara said grimly. The recording showed the final hours of the siege. Instead of surrendering, the human colonists had destroyed their own settlement rather than let it fall into Zephyrian hands. Men, women, and children had chosen death over submission. This is what we are facing, Kethmara said as the recording ended. A species that would rather die than be conquered. A species that turns defeat into victory by making conquest too costly to achieve. The council chamber was silent as the implications sank in. If they attacked humanity, they would not be fighting a war of conquest. They would be fighting a war of extermination. And extermination worked both ways. Intelligence Director Yelthara presented the final piece of evidence that would determine humanity's fate. She had been monitoring human communications and had intercepted a message from Earth's military leadership. This message was sent to all human military commanders, she announced. Listen to what it says. The translation appeared on the main display. If Earth falls, every human world is authorized to use any means necessary to continue the fight. There will be no surrender. There will be no peace until either humanity survives or our enemies are destroyed. The message was signed by every human military leader, every colonial governor, and every elected representative. It was not just a military order. It was a species-wide commitment to fight to the death. They have learned from our last war, Vextara said. They know that we might defeat their fleets and conquer their worlds. But they also know that occupation is different from victory, and they are prepared to make occupation impossible. War Minister Dexthara was still pushing for attack. So we do not occupy their worlds. We destroy them completely. We eliminate the human species entirely. And then? Asked Council Leader Morthic. What happens to us after we commit genocide against an entire species? What happens to our own souls? What happens when other species learn what we have done? The question hit at the heart of Zephyrian culture. They were a proud species, but they were not monsters. The idea of deliberately exterminating billions of sentient beings was horrifying to most of them. But more importantly, there was a practical consideration. If the Zephyrians could exterminate humanity, then other species might decide that the Zephyrians were too dangerous to be allowed to exist. General Kethmara made the final argument that would decide humanity's fate. We are debating whether to attack a species that has already proven it can hurt us badly. We are considering genocide against beings who have shown they will never stop fighting back. We are planning to start a war that we might win, but that will cost us more than any victory is worth. He looked around the chamber at his fellow council members. 50 years ago, we fought the humans and learned what they were capable of. Today, we must decide if we want to learn what they have become. The vote was called. One by one, the council members made their choice. When it was over, the decision was unanimous. The Zephyrian Empire would not attack humanity. The fleets would withdraw. The war plans would be abandoned. The trade negotiations would resume under new terms that respected human strength. The message was sent immediately to all Zephyrian forces. Stand down. Return to base. Do not engage human targets. On the trade station, Captain Morrison received the news with a mixture of relief and amazement. The Zephyrians were backing down. The war that had seemed inevitable just hours before was not going to happen. They chose peace, Dr. Wells said, hardly believing it herself. No, Morrison corrected her. They chose survival. They realized that Fighting us would cost more than they were willing to pay. The humans on the station would live. The colonies would remain safe.